make sure this gets posted. All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Palomeni. I'm the president of the U.S. Society for Ecological Economics. Welcome to today's seminar. Thank you for attending. I think you'll find it very interesting and informative. Please take a chance to look at our website as well as the Facebook page. If you're not a member, consider joining. I think there's a lot of benefits. We're going to have a lot more of these seminars in the coming months and year to come. This is the second of our seminars on a new program that we're starting on a fellows program for the Society. And we have a number of honorary members, which were very influential in ecological economics, that we are making as our first round of fellows. So with that, I will turn it over to our speaker today, Erik Nordman, and he will be speaking about our honorary fellow, Elinor Ostrom. Thank you, Erik.
All right. Thank you very much, John. Let me share my screen. And then change it to presentation mode. See if that works.
Oh, one quick thing. Sorry, I forgot.
Sure.
If you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat, or there'll be opportunity at the end. You'll be able to ask questions as well. Sorry about that, Erik.
Am I still here? I think Zoom crashed on me.
I hear you.
Okay, here I am. Let me try that again. That was scary. Okay. All right. Here we go. So you should all be able to see the slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, John. So this is the second lecture in the induction of our inaugural class of U.S. Society for Ecological Economics Fellows. And we'll be talking today about Dr. Elinor Ostrom. So just briefly, John already told you a little bit about the U.S. Society for Ecological Economics, but we are the national chapter for the International Society for Ecological Economics. You can learn more about our organization at the website there. It's USSEE.org. And you can find all kinds of resources for if you're a teacher, an instructor. We have lessons and resources for your classroom, for research, for jobs and grant and scholarship opportunities and things like that. So it's really a great resource for anyone interested in ecological economics and learning about it and practicing it. This talk will be archived. The previous talk inducting Dr. Nicholas Georgescu-Rojan was archived, and that's available. And this one will be too on Elinor Ostrom. So there are lots of other webinars. I will say that I gave a talk about Elinor Ostrom specifically and her work back in 2020 to the Society. So that talk is archived on the Ecological Economics website as well. So today I'm going to talk about Ostrom in the context of ecological economics because she is being honored as a fellow posthumously. But if you want to learn more about her, you can check out that webinar on the website. All right, so Elinor Ostrom made enduring contributions to social sciences generally, especially political science, where that was kind of her home academic department. But her influence was extremely broad and includes a big influence on the development of ecological economics. So I'd like to start out talking about some of the work that she's most well known for, and that's what she called the commons dilemma. How do we manage shared resources like natural resource commons? She also made more fundamental, or she made fundamental contributions to the discipline of ecological economics, things that we often take for granted that she's not, at least I did not know that she was responsible for. And kind of looking towards the future, we'll wrap up with a discussion of the role of the work that she did, which was really in political economy and institutional economics, and how that's being applied to ecological economics. So that's our roadmap for this talk. So Ostrom is probably, if you know Ostrom, you probably know her for her work, her groundbreaking analysis of economic governance, especially of the commons. And her work is closely associated with that of Garrett Hardin. So Hardin, back in 1968, famously wrote the article, "The Tragedy of the Commons." It's one of the most popular articles that Science magazine has ever published. But in that essay, and it was an essay, it wasn't a research paper. In this essay, Hardin sets up a parable, really, about resource overconsumption. That he says that if we have a shared resource, a commons, that is open to all, the shared pasture is open to all, that people, individuals who are following their own rational self-interest will bring more animals to graze on this shared pasture. And we get the benefits of that privately, but we share the costs. And then each person following their own self-interest will eventually lead to the collapse and destruction of that shared resource. And the only way to avoid that, ruin in a freedom in a commons brings ruin to all, Hardin said. So the only ways, according to Hardin, to avoid that resource destruction of a shared resource, a commons, was either to privatize it, so put up little fences, and if I overgraze my area, it doesn't affect anyone else, or to have the government, an outside government, impose restrictions on those resource users. According to Hardin, those are the only two options: privatization or government regulations. The resource users themselves, according to Hardin, were trapped, like as in a Greek tragedy. They're trapped, and their fate is sealed, that they are destined to overgraze the commons. And it's not just about, a shared pasture. He expanded this to shared resources in general, and really the point of his essay was about human population. So his work was really influential, incredibly influential through most of the second half of the 20th century, even to today, but he gets some major things wrong, right? This wasn't a research article, this was an essay. And Ostrom was, I'd say, pretty charitable, and she said he was not totally wrong, but he was incomplete. People do sometimes even, maybe perhaps even often, overgraze a shared pasture, or overharvest a fishery, or put too much pollution into the atmosphere. But we're not trapped to doing this. There are ways out of it. Privatization can work in some situations. Government regulations can work in some situations. But in between, there's a huge area of civil society institutions. The resource users, that's us. We can take the matters into our own hands and collaborate with one another and design sets of rules and norms of behavior and institutions, which are called institutions, to manage these shared resources through self-governance. In Hardin's perspective, commons are a market failure, right? There is something wrong that needs to be fixed. In Ostrom's conception, commons are an intentional way of managing a resource, right? It's not a mistake. It's not an accident This is an intentional, purposeful way of arranging the management of this shared resource. So it's actually a positive thing, right? And it can, under certain circumstances, work well. And in that, her groundbreaking book, Governing the Commons from 1990, she drew upon many case studies and of places that were successful in managing their shared commons and places that were unsuccessful. And she identified 8 design principles for how to manage and sustain a commons, whether it's a fishery, a forest, or a pasture or anything like that, right? There are certain principles that are usually in place when those are successful, and they're usually often missing when they're not.
Eric, I just want to interrupt.
Oh, sure.
Your slides don't seem to be moving forward on the screen.
Not moving. Oh, okay.
You're still on the, at least what I'm seeing is there you go. Now
All
you're
right,
on
we'll
slide
just,
2.
I am so sorry. Okay.
Click the little desk down below so you can make it bigger. Get rid
Yeah,
of.
that's what I did,
I
and
thought you did.
that's where I
tried
lost
to do
it.
it.
That's,
Well, how about slideshow up above? That might work.
I'm just gonna, I'll stop sharing and I'll try sharing again. Sorry about that.
Hey, Eric, I think if you're using 2 monitors, I think it's the other monitor that's sharing the one you're
Yeah,
looking at.
I'm only on one monitor. Oh, I know what it is. I can do share the screen instead of the app. I think that's what I want to do.
There you go.
Okay,
Looks good.
sorry about that. Okay, so, right, governing the commons, it's not a failure, right? We can have an intentional management of a commons, and we can do that through self-governance. And it's for this work that Ostrom was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics back in 2009. And she was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Economics. So she was groundbreaking in a number of ways. In her Nobel Prize address, she titled it Beyond Markets and States, Polycentric Governance of Complex Economic Systems. And just from that title, you really get the sense of what her whole academic career was about, right? There's so much, so much focus on either privatize it and let the markets figure it out, or regulate it through, top-down government intervention. But there's so many opportunities aside from that, beyond markets and states. What civil society institutions, from local condo boards to lobster fishermen getting together in these harbor gangs to manage their catch. There are so many different ways around the world and at different scales that we can manage these complex economic systems. And that word polycentricity, polycentric governance, that's in that title too, that was another key idea of Ostrom, along with her husband, Vincent Ostrom, who was also a political scientist. Polycentric governance is many layers of nested governance. The idea is that you want to solve the problem at the scale at which it happens, right? So, you can devolve or decentralize it too much, and you have lots of little local governments, but the problem is occurring regionally. None of those local governments are going to be able to solve it. But you also don't necessarily want, a national government imposing a solution on communities. You want to solve that problem at the level that it occurs. So sometimes it requires communities to come together or individuals to come together to manage that shared resource. So that's what polycentric governance is really about. So we got to get beyond this false dichotomy of the market versus the state. There are lots of other ways to solve problems. So in addition to her work on commons, for which she was recognized with that Nobel Prize, she made other fundamental contributions to social sciences, including ecological economics. So when I was teaching at the university, I often used a table like this to describe resources in being either rival or non-rival, exclusive or non-exclusive. You might use a table like this. I originally saw it when I was a student in a policy analysis book. And this goes back to the 1950s. Samuelson and Musgrave were describing resources as being, they could be private goods or public goods. Private goods are rival, meaning one person can use it at a time, or sometimes the people will use the term subtractable, that like you're subtracting a fish from the population when you harvest it, right? There's an idea that one person can use it at a time, or it's depletable or rival. And some things are not depletable or not rival, like we can all watch a movie in the theater at the same time. And then there's exclusive and non-exclusive. That means you can exclude people. The property rights are clearly defined. I can put a fence around this and say, this is mine, right? And some things it's hard to do. So private goods are rival and exclusive. Markets generally work well for those things. Public goods are non-rival and non-exclusive. There's often some kind of market failure. The free market, there's really no profit opportunity if you can't exclude people, free riders from using that resource. So public goods are often provided by the government. And that's kind of where it stood for about 20 years, this idea of private goods versus public goods. But you can see that there are two, when you lay it out in a table like this, you can see that there are two other squares that aren't filled in. And it was actually Vincent Ostrom and Elinor Ostrom that kind of fleshed out the rest of the table with their article in 1977, describing club goods, which are sometimes called toll goods, as being non-rival or non-subtractable and exclusive. So you have to join the club. Once you join the club, you have access to these resources just like all the members of the club do. It's not depletable. And then in that last box there, we have goods that are rival and non-exclusive. And here's where we see our commons, or more accurately, open access resources. So your economics textbooks, your environmental economics, ecological economics, policy analysis textbooks, many of them have some version of this table. And when I originally learned it, I saw this table, made a lot of sense. I had no idea until recently that the Ostroms had anything to do with this, right? So that's one of the fundamental contributions to ecological economics and our understanding of resources that gets traced back to Elinor Ostrom and her husband, Vincent. Another really foundational idea is the concept of property rights as a bundle. And this was, we can trace this back to Adela Schlager and Elinor Ostrom's article in 1992. Schlager was a PhD student under Ostrom back in the 80s, and they continued to collaborate until Ostrom's death in 2012. For many economists and political scientists, property rights really just focused on one thing. It was the right to buy and sell property. Once you buy it, you own it, and you have the right to sell it. And that's kind of where it stopped. But Ostrom and Schlager really expanded the concept of property rights to not only having the right to buy and sell that property, but the right to trespass. So you could walk across that property. You have the right to use the property, but even though you don't have ownership of it, there are a whole bunch of rights that you may have that are separable. So this is really critical in like land conservancies, for example. If I'm a forest owner and I want to make sure that my forest property stays forest in perpetuity, I can, my property rights are this bundle of sticks. I can pull out one of those sticks that represents development rights. And I can sell those development rights to a local land conservancy. I still retain the rest of the bundle. I can use it, I can harvest it, I can, go hiking on it. I retain the rest of that bundle. I've just sold off the development rights to the land conservancy. I could also sell, say, the right to trespass. So people, can hike on the property even though I still own it, right? So this concept of property rights as a bundle also goes back to Ostrom. And, it's a really common way to phrase it. It's just part of our, common vocabulary now, but that goes back to Ostrom, that idea. So Ostrom made really fundamental contributions to not just ecological economics, but social sciences in general. She's also known for her work with social ecological systems. Looks like there's some chats. I'll get to the questions in the chats in a little bit, but I am monitoring those. Thanks. So yeah, her work on social ecological systems really developed, kind of in the later half of her career. And social ecological systems are now major components of ecological economics. There was an article a few years ago in the journal Ecological Economics called Between Ostrom and Nordhaus, the Research Landscape of Sustainability Economics. And it noted that Ostrom's work is foundational in this concept of social ecological systems, which they described as having a focus on resilience, adaptive management, governance, and polycentricity. There's that word again that was in her Nobel speech title. And this graphic from that article kind of shows some of the major topics in sustainability economics and ecological economics. And you can see that there are 11 clusters, research topic clusters. And the ones in dark green that I've circled there are one cluster around social ecological systems, number 7. So that tends to be on the left side of the diagram. The bright green on the right side is intertemporal distribution, discount rates. That's associated with William Nordhaus and his work on climate change economics. But you see sort of, two extremes going from the left side to the right side. But Ostrom's identified with, social ecological systems modeling, integrating our economic system and embedding that within a social system, within our ecological systems. So her work, in these social ecological systems had a huge influence on ecological economics. And she worked with luminaries in the field like Robert Costanza, Carl Folk, and others. So Ostrom's groundbreaking work is increasingly relevant. Sometimes, scholars have a breakout paper that makes a big impact when it's published, but then kind of peters off. Ostrom's career is just the opposite. I looked at citations from Google Scholar of her book, Governing the Commons, published in 1990. The table only goes back to 1993. But in 1993, that book had 144 citations, which, for most of us would be fantastic. That's just in a single year. But you can see that it took a while for it to really catch on, and her work just kept building and building and building that influence by 2008, 15 years later, it had over 1,300 citations in 1 year, and last year had over 3,000 citations, right? So you can see that her work is, this book from 30 years ago is still relevant today. People are still talking about it and, building on those ideas. Total citations for governing the commons are at 53,213. So you can see again that this is just one of her publications, but it's the one that she's best known for, has a tremendous influence on the field generally. Remember that her work often stands in contrast to Garrett Hardin and the Tragedy of the Commons. And that paper has 54,000 citations. So I'm hoping that every time, in the future, if people are citing Tragedy of the Commons and talking about Tragedy of the Commons and Hardin, people are also looking to Ostrom and saying, yes, but Hardin is incomplete, right? He doesn't get to the whole picture. Ostrom provides, solid research-based evidence that we can go beyond markets and states, that we're not trapped. There is no tragedy. We are capable of charting our own course, collaborating, and solving our problems through self-governance. It's possible. It's hard, it's messy, and it doesn't always work, but it is possible. So looking forward, what's the future of ecological economics and what's Ostrom's influence there? I would say that ecological economics is in many ways an institutional economics. So Ostrom was a political scientist. She got her PhD in political science. She actually tried to get her PhD in economics and applied, but she was rejected. The UCLA economics department did not want women getting PhDs back in the 1950s. For a variety of reasons. The UCLA political science department was told by the university that they had to let in a cohort of 4 women because they hadn't let women in a very long time. So Ostrom was admitted to her, get her PhD in the political science department. So it is ironic that she eventually got a Nobel Prize in economics, even though she was rejected from getting that economics degree. But her work really has been at the intersection of economics and political science. It's this crossover area that political scientists call political economy and economists call institutional economics. Economics, mainstream economics especially, neoclassical economics, really focuses on markets. Right? Markets as a way to allocate scarce resources. But if we step back, a layer of abstraction, markets and capitalism don't just exist on their own. They don't just emerge, from nothing. They depend on a whole system of property rights, that are very formal, also informal norms and behavioral expectations. These are the types of institutions that Ostrom was interested in. And this is what institutional economists study. And I thought about this as I've been studying Ostrom's work over the last several years, and I thought, wow, her work is really institutional ecological economics. And it turns out somebody else had this idea almost 20 years ago. Pavla and Adger wrote an article called Institutional Ecological Economics. And this article I thought was really prescient. It really, tells the story of the last 15 or 20 years in the development of ecological economics and Ostrom's influence on it. Ecological economics is a big tent, right? We include economics, but we also include social and natural sciences and systems theory. Ecological economics recognizes that markets are not the only way to allocate resources, right? They can be a good way, But there's more to the story. It's not the only way. Ecological economics often involves questions of property rights, commons, and public goods. And all of these things are also traits of institutional economics. So I think in many ways, ecological economics has evolved to incorporate many of the ideas of institutional economics and Ostrom's ideas in particular. So to wrap it up, take-home message is that the market and the state are not our only options. Collaboration and self-governance is possible, right? That's the lesson of Elinor Ostrom. And I'd like to leave you with a quote from Ostrom. She said, "Humans have a more complex motivational structure and more capability to solve social dilemmas than they are given credit for. A core goal of public policy should be to facilitate the development of institutions that bring out the best in humans." So hopefully I've made the case that Ostrom belongs to our pantheon of USSEE fellows. She published in Ecological Economics. She attended the national meetings, and I, for one, think she was highly influential and is a good person to have to look up to. So thank you very much. What? I wasn't watching the time. What are we doing? Oh, good. We have time for questions. Yeah, I'll turn it back over to John for moderation.
Well, we have a comment in the chat box. It says, this is from Bijesh. Every private entity would focus on their own profitability or income. A rational human being would try to utilize as much resource as they can to get highest benefit to them, regardless of what would happen to the environment. How could privatization help in governing the commons? And why don't we start there?
Sure. Yeah, so that was, that's kind of where Hardin started from. That you are, people are rational and self-interested. And if you have this shared resource, you're going to use it all up. And certainly that does happen, right? Ostrom didn't say that it doesn't happen. Of course it happens. Scholars from, in a similar vein have looked to the prisoner's dilemma in game theory and said, look, if we have, I don't have time to get into the game theory, but if you have, this particular set of rules, right? If you set up the rules of the game, people will act a certain way. And Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons is, basically an application of the prisoner's dilemma in game theory. However, Ostrom also collaborated with game theorists and economists skilled in game theory, and they changed some of the rules. They tweaked the rules, they played multiple rounds, and they found that humans don't always act as you expect in like the one-round game of game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. So if you take all the resources in the first round, Ostrom liked to say, no one wants to be a sucker. I might trust you in the first round to, be a collaborator and share the resources equitably. But if I find that I trust you and you take all those resources in the first round, I'm not going to trust you in the second round. And, if you have multiplayers, the other players might gang up on that first one and say, hey, you're not welcome. You're not playing by the rules, right? So human behavior is more complex and provides more opportunity for collaboration than you would expect in sort of like the basic game theory prisoner's dilemma. That's, the tragedy of the commons. And it doesn't always work, but Ostrom also said, if it works in practice, it works in theory. And she and her graduate students and collaborators found examples all around the world. Lobster harvesters in Maine, irrigators, irrigation communities and farmers in Valencia, Spain, mountain communities in Japan. All these communities, Nepal had a number of irrigation communities as well. They all got together and were able to sustain these resources for thousands of years without government intervention, without privatizing it. They were able to share these resources and sustain them. So, like she said, if it works in practice, we can see these examples of just regular people figuring it out, doing the hard work of collaboration. If it works in practice, it works in theory. And it's up to us as researchers, as academics, as practitioners to figure out, well, what is that theory? What are the conditions on which it works? And how does it fail? So it's complicated.
Then there's a couple other comments. One is the term may be used as Earth core object, and eco, capital ECO, the common term for core chemical products. Thoughts?
Yeah. Does the person want to
Expand on that.
expand on that? Yeah. Well, if you want to jump in, unmute yourself, you could just explain a little more.
Should be able to unmute yourself, so please chime in. Oh, maybe oh, I guess he's a little shy. So we'll
Okay.
move on then. There's a couple comments about rationality, which we'll get to. And here's a question. Didn't Ostrom give some examples of small indigenous societies that have had successful resource governments? And would you address the small versus large numbers aspect of the commons issue?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Yes, Ostrom really worked from the ground up, identifying these communities of resource users. I should step back and say Ostrom came from a perspective of what she called public entrepreneurs. She was a political scientist first and was looking for examples of communities that were creatively solving problems in this polycentric manner. And so this was when she was a graduate student before Hardin wrote The Tragedy of the Commons. So she was looking for these examples of public entrepreneurs, creative ways to solve these collaboration problems. And so she started looking first in her backyard in the Los Angeles area of groundwater using communities. Then she went into kind of down a different path about municipal governance. She did a series of policing studies, but in the 1980s came back to natural resources because there are so many of these examples of collaboration, whether it's water, forests, fisheries. So it provided a unique set of examples from which she could compare and contrast resource management regimes. So she wasn't like an environmental scientist or resource manager by background. She just kind of came to that because of this interest in collaboration. So yeah, there are lots of examples from around the world of resource using communities. And at first she did study kind of local units of collaboration. So behind me, you can see some photos of the water court in Valencia, Spain. And this is a good example. This irrigation community around Valencia, Spain is composed of these small irrigation districts. And then the farmers from those irrigation districts elect from their own ranks someone to serve as a syndic or leader of that district, and then that leader serves on the whole region's water court. And the water court resolves conflicts, and they figure out how much people are going to pay for the right to water, and they have engineers that figure out how much water is available in the system at any time. So you can see that's a good example of that polycentric governance, that, yeah, there's this water court that serves the whole region, but then there are individual irrigation districts based on which canal you get water from. But then in the 90s and 2000s, Ostrom turned towards global commons, right? Because we have concerns about climate change, managing even space resources. We have all these global shared resources. Can the principles of these local commons be applied to global commons? And that is ongoing research. I think the answer is tentatively yes. Some of them do apply. When it comes to climate change, it's not like all 7 billion humans are going to get together and do this, but we have 190 something nations. And that's a small enough number that you can have the community of nations figure out what's a global, the global allocation of carbon emissions. And that's really the structure of the Paris Agreement, where we have voluntary, voluntary agreement about reducing emissions at the national level. Then it's up to each nation to figure out how they're going to implement it, rather than getting a one-size-fits-all legally binding treaty.
That kind of leads us into the next question is, what were Ostrom, or did she have any perspectives on solving climate change?
Yeah, she said, well, having a legally binding global one-size-fits-all solution, like a global carbon tax, would be very difficult. And in the meantime, we're burning up carbon and putting more in the atmosphere. So having a polycentric approach and having an agreement on general principles at the high levels, but letting individual nations and subnational units, states and provinces and cities figure out their own ways, what works for them. That's probably the best way forward. And I think she was right. I will also say that I saw a quote from her just last week, when Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, came out. Someone asked her, what do you think about, small is beautiful? And she said, small can also be very ugly. That's very true, right? There's no one size fits all solution. Small communities can maybe very exclusionary to, a certain minority group of people, for example. It could be a bully, that dominates a small group. So small can be beautiful, but small can also be ugly. There are no panaceas, right? But we do want to keep your eye on the prize and solve the problem at the level that it occurs. So sometimes devolving it to the local communities is the right thing. Sometimes the communities have to get together to solve a regional problem.
You mind if I interject?
Sure.
Well, how about solving the developed versus non-developed nations, and let's say past liability kinds of things? Does she have a solution for that?
That's a great question. Her work is very closely tied to development, international development, development economics, poverty alleviation, and things like that. I am not aware of any of her work that directly ties to, the equitable distribution of climate damages or reparations or anything like that.
Okay, that's really a tough one.
Yeah.
We're going to save the next question till the end, when I think you have something else to say. But here's a follow-up question. Thinking about global geopolitics on the utilization of natural resources, there are lots of public diplomacy, political influence, and so many things that powerful countries use to enforce their interests on less developing countries. This is beyond the explanation of simple game theory framework. It's a whole lot complex than what you are saying.
Yeah, so this is, kind of that question of, we have evidence. Ostrom and her colleagues, showed lots of evidence along lots of different lines about what works for managing a local commons. Things like having clearly defined boundaries, participatory rulemaking, graduated sanctions for people that break those rules. She came up with these 8 design principles that generally tend to be present when commons are successfully managed, often missing when they're not. And, can that be scaled up to, public diplomacy and national competition for resources? That is, that's a really timely question. There are cases where it's been successful, like the management of Antarctica, for example. Antarctica does not belong to any single country, but the countries of the world have got together to sign the Antarctic Treaty system, and it's a globally managed commons. The lessons from that success were applied to managing outer space. Starting in the 1960s, there was a series of treaties to manage outer space resources. There's the Outer Space Treaty and several follow-on ones. And those mostly have been pretty successful in managing our orbits. So there's, you can't have 2 satellites in the same orbit, all still crash. Trying not to militarize outer space, property rights on the moon. Now they're starting to get, they're starting to be challenged really by technology, because people are now really wanting to go to the moon and want to exploit these resources. And there are so many satellites that we're piling up space debris, and these are becoming problems. Are there limits to that collaborative approach? Yes, but also there's no global government that's going to impose a solution on us. The only choice we have is some sort of collaborative agreement and punish those who, intentionally blow up a satellite and create a bunch of space debris. So it is, it's not perfect. But I think there's a lot to offer resource management at lots of levels.
Next is, how can we deal with the aspects of the global economic and political order, unequal, unjust, still imperialist, to allow for the possibility of commons to flourish? What did Ostrom say, and what would you say?
Yeah, it is. I don't have a good answer for you, I guess, off the top of my head. How do we deal with the aspects of the global economic and political order that is unequal, unjust? At the core, Ostrom was optimistic and believed in the power of people. The power of people to solve their own problems, right? And do so creatively. So, through democratic self-governance, I think that's really, that's the way forward. Because we can't wait for, somebody from outside to save us. And the market probably isn't going to do that either. So really it is up to us. How do you do that? At a global level, I don't know. And I'd probably have a Nobel Prize if I did. I don't think anybody's really figured that out.
Here's one. The there's a question about asking you to speak a little bit about your book on Ostrom and talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, so in 2021, I published a book called The Uncommon Knowledge of Elinor Ostrom, Essential Lessons for Collective Action. And so in teaching about Ostrom, I found that, she was a prolific writer, but her work is really geared towards an advanced academic audience and can be difficult to read. So I decided to write something that introduced Ostrom's life and ideas to a broad audience, especially the undergraduates that I was teaching, but also people outside of academia that I think would really appreciate the work that she did. And she deserves to be better known. So yeah, I wrote this book, The Uncommon Knowledge of Elinor Ostrom. It is just a good introduction to her life and ideas, and I think it's pretty inspirational. So I do have a copy of the book that I can give away today. And so Kyle was going to do us a favor and pick one of the attendees at random to get a copy of the book.
Okay, so I put all of the non-board members, board members, who are in attendance into a random number selector here. And the winner of the book is Catherine. I don't have your last name, Catherine, but if you want to send an email to this address, we will get your book out to you.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, for attending. And yeah, we'll get a copy of the book, The Uncommon Knowledge of Elinor Ostrom, out to you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just share with Kyle your details.
Is Catherine our former board member?
No, I am not. I'm an environmental economist in the social sciences branch in Northeast Fisheries Science Center, Woods Hole.
All right.
Oh, good, thank you.
I work with
Good.
protected resources with Mike Asaro.
Oh, Mike, right.
Oh, cool. Wonderful. Thanks for coming, everyone. Yeah, so this video will be archived on the USSEE.org website, so you can revisit it or share it with your friends and colleagues. And I'll turn it back over to John to wrap it up.
Well, first of all, thank you to Erik for the great seminar, as well as donating one of his books. So thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And then to everybody online, please watch out for additional seminars as we move forward. We'll try to have at least one, if not two, a month. So that's the goal. And we have some good speakers lined up, I think. And hopefully you'll find them interesting, like with Erik. And so just keep looking out on our Facebook page, our web page, and we also try to cross advertise with the ISEE page, as well as some other like-minded groups. So please look out for those, and we hope that you'll attend in the future. And thank you again for attending.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Have
Erik.
a good day, everyone.
Thank you.